At a dinner meant to celebrate my success, my father raised a glass, then handed the company I built from the ground up to my brother. A $75 million empire, gifted like a birthday present. I didn't flinch. I didn't fight. Not then. Because by morning they would realize, I don't raise my voice. I rewrite the rules. At the dinner table, the wine sparkled under soft chandelier light, the crystal catching reflections of a room full of polite smiles and whispered congratulations. My father stood, glass in hand, and cleared his throat, just enough to quiet the room but not so much to suggest drama. That was never his style. I think it's time, he said, smiling at the people he always loved to impress. I've made a decision. Jackson will be stepping in to lead the company moving forward. The applause came quickly, too quickly, before the silence between the words could fully register. My fingers tightened around my wine glass, not hard enough to crack it, just enough to ground myself. I smiled, reflexively, smoothly. My father's smile widened as he placed a hand on Jackson's shoulder, proud and performative. Jackson, of course, gave his usual sheepish shrug, the one he wore every time he won something he didn't earn. The room, my family, our old money friends, board members dressed like dinner guests, buzzed with a kind of reverence I had only ever seen directed at men in suits who had done nothing but share a last name with someone who actually built something. I watched them lift their glasses. I joined them. To Jackson, I said, my voice even, the edges perfectly smooth. They thought I was congratulating him. Maybe I was. But I didn't feel rage. Not yet. I felt calculation. It wasn't shock. That would imply I hadn't seen this coming. I had. The signs were there. Closed-door conversations that stopped when I walked in, documents I wasn't copied on, my father's increasingly ceremonial presence in the company I ran day to day, and Jackson's sudden interest in checking in more often. The pieces were already moving. This wasn't a betrayal. It was a miscalculation on their part. Because what none of them seemed to understand, not my father, not Jackson, not anyone in that room raising a glass to the wrong person, was that I hadn't just been growing the company. I had been protecting my stake in it. Quietly. Strategically. 12 years ago, Harper & Company was nearly bankrupt. I stepped in fresh out of business school, not because I wanted Daddy's approval, but because I saw something no one else did: potential. I turned it into a $100 million empire. Without shortcuts, without favors, and without anyone holding the door for me. And now they thought they could hand it over like a bottle of wine at a dinner party? Let them celebrate. Let them toast to Jackson's sudden promotion. Let them mistake silence for surrender. Because tomorrow morning, I wasn't showing up as the daughter who got sidelined. I was coming in as the woman who owned the battlefield. I barely slept that night. Not because I was hurt, but because my mind wouldn't stop sorting, calculating, preparing. While they were toasting stolen victories, I was back in my home office, coffee in hand, legal documents glowing on my second monitor. Every contract, every clause, every executive agreement signed in the last 12 years lived in folders I'd built myself. The company had grown into a $100 million machine under my watch, and I had engineered every piece of it. Jackson thought he was walking into a smooth handover. He had no idea I was already 5 moves ahead. At 3:14 a.m., I opened a file labeled Executive Shareholders Agreement. My fingers paused just slightly before clicking. That document, signed during a quiet restructuring 7 years ago, was the cornerstone of my position. It had taken years of careful negotiations, investments, and calculated silence to get those signatures. My name, my father's, and of course Jackson's. His barely legible. He never read the fine print. By sunrise, I had 3 more files open. My investment documents from the 2017 capital injection, when the company needed a lifeline and I delivered it. My father, in a moment of desperation, had signed over 15% equity. Then again in 2019, when a legal dispute nearly halted our West Coast expansion, he signed another 10% to me as collateral. He never reclaimed it. He forgot or underestimated. Add that to the 35% I already owned outright. Control. Silent. Absolute. I wasn't planning a confrontation. I was preparing a correction. At 8:45 a.m., I walked into Harper & Company headquarters as I had for the last 12 years. Same polished floors. Same low hum of ambition pulsing through the halls. But today the air was charged, heavy with whispers and sidelong glances. The announcement had spread. My father had made it official. They thought they were witnessing a peaceful succession. They had no idea they were standing at the edge of a war. I didn't return greetings. I didn't offer smiles. I walked the halls like they were mine because they were. People stepped aside, unsure which side of the story they belonged to yet. That was fine. Let them hesitate. Let them watch. In 15 minutes my father and Jackson would arrive. Confident. Unaware. Expecting cooperation. But what they'd find waiting wasn't the daughter they believed would comply. It was the woman who had built the battlefield and laid every trap. I stepped into my office, closed the door behind me, and opened the document on the main screen, the same one I'd reviewed hours earlier. I highlighted the clause I knew would matter most. Any transfer of executive power must be approved by a majority shareholder. Then I waited. I didn't feel nervous. I didn't feel angry. I felt ready. The knock came at exactly 9 a.m. Not urgent. Not hesitant. Just entitled. I didn't answer. I wanted them to walk in like they owned the room. They did. My father entered first, posture straight, gaze surveying like a monarch inspecting his court. Jackson followed, wrapped in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than he'd made in his last venture. His grin was already halfway there. "Aria," my father said, using that firm, authoritative tone he reserved for moments when he expected compliance. "I assume you're aware of the transition happening today." I leaned back in my chair, steepled my fingers. Transition. Interesting word choice. "I'm aware." "Good," he nodded, completely missing the current under my tone. "Jackson will be stepping in as CEO. I'd like you to assist with the handover." "Handover?" I repeated, with a trace of amusement. "Dad, I think you're mistaken about something." His expression flickered just briefly, the same way it used to when I'd questioned one of his assumptions as a teenager. He still hadn't adjusted to the fact that I no longer asked for permission. "This isn't up for debate," he said, voice clipped. "We've already made the decision." I smiled then. Not the fake one I'd worn at dinner, but something colder. Sharper. "Oh, I know. The thing is, you don't have the authority to make that decision." Jackson scoffed. "Aria, don't make this dramatic. We're trying to do this the easy way." Without breaking eye contact, I picked up the remote from my desk and clicked. The office wall lit up. On the screen, Executive Shareholders Agreement signed August 17, 2016. I highlighted a clause. Any transfer of executive control requires approval from the majority shareholder. My father stiffened. Jackson squinted at the screen, confused. "Do you even know what this is?" I asked, voice steady. "A shareholders agreement," he muttered. "Yes. And it says you need majority approval for any leadership changes." My father opened his mouth, but I continued. "I own 60% of Harper and Company shares." That silenced them. 2017, you needed capital. You signed over 15% to me. 2019 legal settlement, another 10%. Add that to the 35% I already owned outright. Jackson was already shaking his head. "This is a setup, Dad. She can't." "She can." My father cut in, staring at the screen. He knew. He remembered. I stood slow and controlled. "I'm not firing anyone. But let's be clear. I'm not stepping down. You will report to me. Or you can leave. Your choice." Jackson looked at my father, desperate for backup. But my father, James Harper, said nothing. Because for the first time in his life he realized. This company no longer belonged to him. It belonged to me. They left without another word. Jackson's face was pale with fury, and my father's eyes, once full of quiet dominance, were clouded with something far less useful, uncertainty. I sat back down, alone in my office, letting the silence wrap around me like armor. I knew better than to mistake this moment for victory. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. I had just drawn a line across the boardroom floor, and now the pieces would start to shift. The real game was about to begin. And unlike them, I didn't need applause to move forward. I needed control. That afternoon I noticed it. The hesitation in the hallway. The silence that followed after my footsteps passed. The way a few department heads, people I'd once mentored, suddenly avoided eye contact. Loyalty, as it turned out, had a half-life. My father and Jackson had spent the night making calls. Family friends. Trusted board members. Executives who liked to play both sides of any power struggle. They weren't just bruised. They were regrouping. I didn't panic. I prepared. I called an emergency meeting with the executive team the next day. No agenda. No email trail. Just a time and a place. Let them wonder. At 9 a.m. sharp, I walked into the boardroom. The air was thick with tension. Half the room wouldn't look at me. The other half looked too closely, like they were waiting for blood. I sat at the head of the table. My seat. My table. "Let's not waste time," I said, my voice cutting clean through the room. I know there have been conversations behind closed doors over drinks through whispers. Silence. But let's clear something up. I clicked the remote. The screen behind me lit up with numbers, projections, graphs, financial growth under my leadership. I didn't bother warming them up. I dropped facts like weapons. In the last 5 years, we've grown 300%. We've entered 6 new markets. Profit margins have doubled. That wasn't luck. That was leadership. I turned to Paul, our CFO. "Paul, do we have any indicators of instability?" He shook his head slowly. "No. In fact, Q4 is projecting another 20% increase." I nodded. "So let's be honest. The only thing unstable here is that some of you expected me to step aside so Jackson could walk in like a prince returning to a castle he didn't build. A few people shifted. Then I hit them with the truth. I also know several of you were contacted, incentivized to push for my resignation. If you'd like to disclose that now, this is your chance." Silence again. Then finally, one executive cleared his throat. "My phone rang last night. James, your father asked if I'd back a leadership transition. He hinted at a board vote." I gave a slow, controlled nod. There it was. Proof. I didn't flinch. Anyone else? No one spoke. I stood. If anyone believes they're on the wrong side of this, now's the time to walk out. Nobody moved. I smiled. Round 1 was mine. That night I didn't call a lawyer. I called a journalist. Not just any journalist. A veteran in business exposés. Someone who had built a career exposing cracks behind polished glass towers. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I said, "I have something for you," he listened. I didn't need a press conference. I didn't need to explain myself on social media. I had something better: proof. By morning, the article hit the front page of every major financial outlet. Behind the legacy, Harper & Co.'s silent rebuilder speaks through the numbers. It wasn't just a puff piece. It was fire. It included internal records, memos, tax discrepancies, things I had been quietly collecting for years while cleaning up the very messes my father created. It painted a clear picture. I wasn't just the woman who took over. I was the reason Harper & Co. survived. The media flipped almost overnight. Comments on business forums changed from skepticism to respect. Headlines no longer questioned whether I was too aggressive. Now they asked how many other companies were held together by daughters in the shadows. By noon, my father released a statement, bland, carefully worded, filled with veiled jabs. "We remain committed to the family values that built Harper & Company. Change is difficult but necessary." Subtext. I was difficult. I was disloyal. I wasn't family enough. Let them push that narrative. As I had one more move. At 3 p.m. I released my own statement. No quotes. No bitterness. Just raw data. A breakdown of Harper & Co.'s growth timeline. My strategic decisions by year. Market expansions. Crisis recoveries. Photos from product launches I led solo. Meeting transcripts where Jackson wasn't even present. I let the facts speak louder than defense ever could. It worked. Investors began emailing my assistant directly, offering continued support, asking about next quarter's projections. One VC even added a note. "Frankly, I'd back you over both of them combined." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. By 6 p.m., Jackson had deleted his LinkedIn bio line. Incoming CEO, Harper & Company. By 9 o'clock, I heard he'd fled the city for a break. Let him run. Let my father stew in silence while the empire he thought he could reclaim drifted further from his grasp with each headline. Power isn't about who shouts loudest. It's about who owns the narrative when everyone else stops listening. That night I went home, poured myself a glass of whiskey, and stared at the skyline from my balcony. I had burned no bridges. I had simply walked over them and let them collapse behind me. 2 days later my father called. He never called. He summoned. He scheduled. He left vague, formal messages through assistants. But now the caller ID said James Harper. And the silence before I picked up was the loudest part. I let it ring 3 times. Aria, he said. Not sweetheart. Not darling. Just my name. Plain. Honest. We need to talk. I leaned back in my chair, watching the city through the glass. Do we? Silence. Then a breath. You didn't have to do that. I smiled faintly. Neither did you. He sighed. This company was supposed to be a legacy. For the family. For both of you. You should have thought of that, I replied, voice calm, before you tried to erase me from it. Another long pause. What happens now? He asked, and for the first time in my life it sounded like a real question. Not a test, not a setup. Now. I exhaled. Now I make sure you can't touch Harper & Co. ever again. He didn't argue. He knew he'd lost. But victory didn't taste like champagne. Tasted like clean air. Like silence. Like distance. The next morning he requested a final meeting. He came to the office alone. No entourage. No Jackson. Just a tired man in an expensive suit that no longer fit like armor. I'm retiring, he said, lowering himself into the chair across from me. Effective immediately. I didn't react. I had already prepared the paperwork. He continued. I'll sell my remaining shares. Keep a small stake as an investor. But I won't interfere again. And Jackson? He's gone, my father admitted, eyes fixed on the floor. Took the buyout. He won't be back. I nodded slowly. He rubbed his temples like someone fighting a headache, not of the body, but of regret. Then he said it, quietly, without ceremony. I underestimated you. It wasn't an apology, but it was more than I ever expected. And strangely I realized something. I didn't need it anymore. That chapter, the part of me that once sought his approval, that once dreamed of being seen, was over. 1 month later Harper & Co. looked nothing like it had before. The board had shifted. The old guard was out. My vision, modern, clean, relentless, was in motion. Profits rose. New markets opened. No one asked if I was capable anymore. They knew. And for the first time I wasn't building for validation. I was building something untouchable. 1 year later we hit the $150 million mark. No fanfare. No gala dinner. Just a quiet line on a quarterly report and the subtle shift in how competitors said our name in meetings, carefully, with respect. I didn't throw a party. I signed 3 more partnership contracts that afternoon and reviewed expansion plans into Asia. Then I went home, fed my dog, and opened a bottle of wine. That's what winning looked like now. My father hadn't called again. Jackson had disappeared into a string of failed side ventures last I heard. His LinkedIn bio said, consultant. I didn't check twice. The board no longer whispered behind closed doors. There was no need. Results silenced doubt faster than any speech ever could. At noon the following week I stood in the corner office, my office, overlooking the city skyline. My assistant knocked lightly before entering. There's someone here to see you, she said. Who? He didn't say. Just handed me this. She placed a folded piece of paper on my desk and left. I opened it. Riverstone Cafe. 7 p.m. I didn't respond. But at 6:59 p.m., I was already sitting by the window, watching the rain tap gently against the glass. He arrived on time. No suit. No entourage. Just an older man, face a little more weathered, eyes softer. You came, he said. I was curious. He nodded. I read about the China deal. Impressive. I know. He smiled faintly. You've changed. No, I said. I just stopped asking. He looked down at his hands, now void of rings, of the signature watch he once flaunted. Just hands. Human. Flawed. I wanted to hate you, he admitted quietly. But I couldn't. Because deep down I knew. You were always the one holding this place together. I said nothing. We sat in silence. Then he lifted his glass. To Harper and Company. I met his eyes. This time I raised mine back. And clinked. But not for him. Not for us. For me. The girl who had been overlooked. The woman who refused to stay invisible. The leader no one saw coming. Until it was too late. As I walked back to my car that night, I passed a bookstore window. A headline on a business magazine caught my eye. Power reclaimed. How Aria Harper silenced doubt with results. I didn't buy it. I didn't need to. Because the real headline wasn't in print. It was in every meeting where no one dared question me anymore. It was in every decision made without needing permission. It was in every inch of Harper and Company. I had rebuilt. Not to prove a point, but to build a future no one could take from me again.